begin, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on Twitter @L'Atelier, so you can be notified of our live streams and updates. We have a lot of content coming in the coming weeks, including 2 newsletters. I curate the English version, and I'd love to share it with you, so please sign up to receive it on atelier.net. In today's episode, we will talk about goods and assets, but they're not goods and assets as we know them. They exist in virtual economies. The virtual economy, it's a place that is inhabited by around 2.5 billion people. We all access it through phones, consoles, laptops, desktops, and VR headsets. And we, in our research, found immense activity and a lot of opportunity. We foresee over $130 billion spent by 2021, up from $109 billion in 2019. And we think this is a conservative estimate. Even though a lot of this revenue is focused on gaming platforms that are very much centralized, we're also seeing the rise of decentralized platforms that exist largely on the blockchain. So virtual goods and assets, they vary in nature. They can be weapons, they can be cars, they can be real estate, skins, clothing, characters, accessories, currencies, really an infinity of things. And we'll be talking about many of those in our conversation today. And they can be created either by game publishers within a game or by a third-party vendor. In some rare cases now, by players themselves. But today, a lot of the marketplaces in the virtual economy are owned by gaming publishers. They set the rules of the virtual world. They oversee its economy and facilitate the creation of assets. And publishers and developers, they determine and manage every aspect of the economy, from the supply of resources to pricing to capital controls. And we have hundreds of millions of people right now building, earning, buying, selling virtual goods and services, using one or more in-game currencies. And these currencies and assets, they can be very rare and desirable, therefore worth a lot of money. But there aren't many places for people to monetize their worth, their assets. So often they have to trade on gray and black markets. There are a few rare cases, such as Linden Lab, Second Life, where you can actually exchange your in-game currency to USD. But with the rise of blockchain, we have a new type of digital goods emerging. These new assets, they allow you to have real ownership of these goods. They can be traded or auctioned on open marketplaces such as OpenSeas, moved from one platform to the other, and in some cases stored offline. They're also unique and authenticated on public blockchains, mainly Ethereum. So what are these virtual goods and assets? How are they valued? How to acquire and trade them? What is their future? These are things we'll ask our panelists today. So on our panel, we have thought leaders, artists, and business people who create, trade, and invest in virtual goods and assets. I want to introduce my guest. We have in alphabetical order Ebbe Altberg. He is the CEO of Linden Lab since 2014. The developer that created Second Life. It's the virtual that really revolutionized what it means to be social online. Second Life has its own currency, the Linden dollar. As I said, it's convertible to the USD. So it has helped fuel the really large economy that sustains corporations with significant revenues. In fact, it has a GDP estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. More recently, Linden Lab has launched Telia, a way to monetize virtual economies, including blockchain-based real estate. As a fun fact, L'Atelier had actually a branch in Second Life back in 2007. So welcome, Ebbe. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Allow me to introduce Josie, Josie Bellini. She's a pioneering artist and designer who has been creating crypto art since 2017. You have a background in finance, right? And you create art that tells the story of the crypto ecosystem. Not only does Josie use canvas and paint in her work, but she also releases digital art and augmented reality scenes to fully immerse reviewers and audience. She's a bit of a celebrity in the field, actually more than a bit. She is a celebrity in the field and has exhibited in virtual world and at major blockchain conferences. I believe you were in Crypto Voxels and a few others, if I'm not mistaken. You can find her art on her website, josie.io, and on the OpenSeas marketplace when it's not sold out. You can also find it on the secondary markets, and we can talk a bit about that later. So welcome, Josie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And then let's move on to Devin. Devin is the co-founder and CEO of OpenSeas. It's one of the largest marketplaces for crypto collectibles. Have over 300 categories and over 10 million items. Are you still at 10 million, Devin, or has that number increased since we spoke?
Increased a bit, but around that.
He also wrote the NFT Bible. We'll talk a bit more about NFTs later, but it really tells you everything you need to know about Ethereum-based crypto assets. I highly recommend this reading. And Devin and his team also helped L'Atelier gather data for our interactive research on virtual economy. Please do check it out on our website. Welcome, Devin.
Thanks for having me.
Moving on to Yat Siu. Yat is an entrepreneur and angel investor. He is the co-founder and chairman of the board at Animoca Brands. It's a company that leverages gamification, blockchain. They do call it the blockchain religion, I think, and artificial intelligence technologies to develop and publish a broad portfolio of mobile products. He previously worked at Atari and interestingly founded Hong Kong's first internet provider. So we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, Tyler Smith. Tyler is a blockchain consultant and crypto-focused angel investor. He's a pioneer not only in blockchain, but also in the virtual goods and assets sphere. He was at the origin of the FreeMyVunk project, Vunk being virtual junk, if I'm not mistaken. It's a precursor to all the decentralized trading platforms that are growing today. Maybe also OpenSeas kind of came out of this type of thinking. He was 10 years ahead of the curve, and we're excited to have you here as the resident visionary.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just dive in. I think I've spoken enough here. So first things first, you all come from very different industries. I would really like to hear how you define virtual goods and assets. How are they used, and how are they particular to your platform? Maybe Josie, you can kick us off.
Sure. Virtual goods are purely digital goods that enhance your experience within different virtual worlds or games. So they can be assets like virtual land, pets, game assets that give you special power-ups, art. But in a lot of these, at the core of it, it is, it basically expands your identity and creates your identity within these worlds. And especially when it comes to art, you can imagine that the avatar that you have within each of these worlds becomes a piece of who you are and really represents who you are to everyone else around you. So from the furniture that you pick, to the art that you're hanging in your virtual house, to the skins that you're wearing in game assets, it truly is a curated experience that you give to the audience around you to show what your identity is.
Thank you very much. Ebbe, would you like to give us some insight on what a virtual good and asset is for you and for Second Life?
Sure. Second Life, that's about to turn 17. It's a solid teenager. We've had a virtual economy for a long, long time. A very free-flowing economy. As you mentioned, there's a virtual currency within the world called the Linden dollar, and people can purchase the Linden dollar using fiat currency and then convert back to fiat to make real money, so they can buy food. Last year, users in Second Life cashed out a little bit over $65 million in earnings. So there's a lot of people making serious money. It's obviously a long tail of people that just makes a little bit of extra money, but there are definitely many players who make hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some serious businesses making more than millions of dollars. We have a lot of experience with what it means to have a digital economy, and you have to then suddenly get involved with a lot of regulatory affairs, because you can't just move money freely between people without certain regulatory processes and stuff. So we created a separate entity called Tilia that houses all of the compliance related stuff and is fully licensed money transmitter, and enables users to do this sort of very free flowing economy, because you can think of the Linden dollar like cash. People can just give cash to each other, if you will, and buy and sell goods and services on the platform. So it's very, very much a mirror of the physical world we live in that sense. And virtual goods is just like Josie said, it's how people express themselves, how they create their environments, and how they create their identities. And no surprise that a lot of the top things in the marketplace that people trade are things that enhance people's look. So hair and body parts and clothing items, fashion items, especially female, is sort of top of the charts when it comes to what people buy and sell. Below fashion, it's a sort of home and garden and other sort of utilities and functionality. So there's a huge range, and Second Life is such an open world that we pretty much have every subject matter that you can think of. If you think of a type of a business or a type of a subject or type of content in the virtual world in Second Life, then in the physical world, I'm pretty sure we've seen it or done it in the virtual world as well. So people buy and sell sailing boats and airplanes and shoes and beards and anything you can imagine. So it's fascinating to see what people do, but a lot of what the people do is what people want to do in life. And so Second Life is a very appropriately named product in that sense. So we've experienced a lot what it means to create an economy, and we've taken the learnings, like I said, and put a lot of that in Tilia, and are now very excited that we're offering Tilia to third parties. And we have a first customer who will be up and running here very shortly. And you mentioned it's a company, Upland, that is doing sort of a virtual real estate market, and will enable people to buy and sell virtual real estate. And they're using Tilia to enable those trades to take place in a safe and regulated fashion. So that's kind of a bit of a view. But the subject matter in Second Life, we have schools, we have teachers teaching students, we have people using it for training. I have heard a lot of nurses being trained to triage patients. We have, communities around role playing. We have businesses that do conferences and meetings. So again, everything you think of and see in the physical world is also happening in Second Life.
Thank you very much, Ebbe. Speaking of real estate, I know, Devin, real estate is a big part of what's being traded on OpenSea. Could you please give us your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So at OpenSea, we kind of deal with a new type of digital asset, a very experimental space at the moment, mostly kind of the early adopter territory, but we're dealing with essentially people creating non-fungible digital assets on blockchains. And at the moment, we've been focused on the Ethereum blockchain, but there are other blockchains that are kind of emerging as interesting places to house these assets as well. So as many of the viewers are probably familiar with, the first project to really make a splash in the space as a blockchain-based digital asset was CryptoKitties back in 2017, and that economy went through. It was, very much a fun experiment and went through its own bubble. But after that, people started getting really interested in, what are the unique things that happen when you decide to put these digital assets on a public ledger versus inside of more of a private game economy. And what that has led to has been this kind of interesting mishmash between people building new virtual worlds from the ground up based on these new types of digital ownership, as well as the crypto art space starting to emerge as kind of an interesting area where people are experimenting with what it means to own a digital asset and sort of the longevity of a digital asset over time. And then just sort of a grab bag of other sorts of digital assets. So things like domain names could be represented on blockchains, even folks who are tying physical assets to digital representation on chain, allowing them to be traded and then withdrawn for that physical asset. So the space we're operating in is it's a lot earlier, it's a lot more nascent, a lot more experimental, but we think there's a lot of interesting things that happen when you represent these assets in sort of a publicly verifiable way that allows, sort of an ecosystem of marketplaces and experiences to exist around them.
Thank you very much, Devin. Moving on to Tyler, I'd like to hear your perspective as a visionary in this sphere. Has your definition of virtual goods evolved since you were working with FreeMyVunk?
Absolutely. I mean, FreeMyVunk really tried to start the discussion about liberating virtual goods. and obviously the place where we wanted to start was where value was already being traded in these gray markets that existed. And anyone who's played games, you know, you find the frustration and the excitement and the opportunity of trading these goods between fellow players. But oftentimes we call them, you know, quote unquote, gray markets because they're either not condoned by the game developer or they are extremely limited in the way in which you can transfer them. So FreeMyVunk started with the premise that if we could put these as tokens onto a public ledger, specifically Ethereum, because Ethereum was the very first blockchain after Bitcoin that changed the game in terms of making it fully customizable to the application that you wanted to build. And we wanted to start with that, and that began a discussion that has evolved tremendously since then. And I think, like for me now, the idea of putting game assets on a blockchain and using that to enable gamers, it feels like such an old idea. There's many new ideas that I think are coming to light now about what a virtual asset can be that are really exciting. And I think probably the most important of these new concepts is this idea of persistence and your digital identity. We're only starting to just barely tap into what it means to have a virtual life. And these virtual assets, not just goods, not just skins, but real persistent attributes that carry with you through the virtual experience is really where we're headed, so that you will have a virtual life that becomes as rich as your physical life.
Thank you very much. It's fascinating. I mean, Ebbe, it's like we've been doing this for 17 years.
Welcome, everybody. Yeah.
Moving to Yat, the floor is yours. I'd love to hear about your vision of virtual goods and assets. I know you focus more on licensed brands right now to bring, you know, the analog, the real into the virtual. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, I mean, our entry into blockchain and non-fungible tokens really started because we got involved with CryptoKitties actually way back late 2017.
Yeah.
Became the publisher for them in Asia and a shareholder. And actually our studio was sort of in Vancouver was involved with that. So anyway, that's a different story altogether, but that's kind of how we saw it and saw the opportunity. But my first experience with virtual good was with MUDs, basically multi-user dungeons, long time ago. So I'm really dating myself. But then I used to work for Atari, so you know I'm already dating. And I remember I bought for like $5 like some virtual sword, and I know it was Avalon or something. Like I forget because I tried all these different MUDs, and it was such a good deal. I thought $5, and now I could do all this stuff in a text-based game that basically had nothing else to offer except the time sink. And that was my first experience. But I think the main observation I would make for virtual goods then and now, the evolution is that virtual goods really existed in the being from the game industry to support a game environment. Right? And I think that's, you know, sort of made sense because virtual assets were sort of inside the walled garden of games. But what I think where it becomes really interesting now, and where I think virtual sort of goods and assets will go is that I think game environments in the future could possibly become containers of value for these assets instead, because that's something you get to keep and move, right? And that's a paradigm shift that actually, you know, game companies aren't necessarily comfortable with, and which is really exciting. Now, on the topic of sort of virtual sort of assets and real estate, I mean, we sort of back in the early days of the internet, we used to run and operate a company, again, dating myself, called mail.com. And with mail.com, we owned domain names like japan.com and like world.com. And, you know, it was basically buying virtual real estate because it was a destination. We thought people would go there because of the domain name. And in the beginning, that worked, right? And then, of course, nowadays, people probably don't care. But now you're seeing much more sort of meta versions of this, you know, whether it's projects like our Sandbox, where people are selling virtual land, which then get traded on OpenSea, or whether it's like Decentraland or obviously Second Life. But these are all things that are evolving, and I think it's also generationally changing, because before buying virtual goods was definitely weird, And a very small number of people used to think that was interesting, but the sort of the realm of science fiction. And today, actually, the other observation I would make for virtual goods is that every person who plays games effectively buys virtual goods. They may not necessarily think of it as, they think of it as owning it. They may not necessarily make a distinction that I'm renting it or that I don't really own it. But when you buy a skin on Fortnite, you're not thinking, I don't own this, right? So there are rules around it, but you don't think of it like renting a tux for your event, right? It's different. You think you own it. And I think that's a psychology that makes it so much easier to transfer it. And when sort of Second Life came about, it was very much like, whoa, this is kind of weird, right? And today, I think the audience is much more prepared for those things than they were before, which I think timing was good. So that's my 2 cents on this.
Thank you, Yat. Actually, one thing that seems to pop into all of your answers is the idea of value. Like, what are they really worth? How is this price set? Is it on the open market? Should it be set by a developer? Is basically leasing an entry in a centralized database, which is what it is when you do a microtransaction, worth what we think it's worth, since we don't own it. I'd love to do another round and really see how, from your perspective, how these virtual goods are valued. Do you think this vision will change in the future? And who's really the market maker here? Is it the publisher? Is it the audience? Is it really set by auction, like on OpenSea? So maybe, Ebbe, I saw you reacting strongly to this point before, so maybe you want to answer this first. How is Second Life encouraging businesses, for example, to strive on its platform and create value?
Well, it's an open market, so it's all the content in the Second Life is created by users. We at Linden Lab are not in the content business; we're in the platform business. So we don't sell any assets except for land that enable people to create the worlds they want to create. All the prices are set by users, and it's supply and demand basically that just dictates what the value of something is. Sometimes the uniqueness of the item, is it something that only I have, because the creators can sort of control whether an item can be modified, whether it can be transferred, whether it's how unique is the asset could have something to do with the value of it. I got a little bit of data, but within the market, we see the average sale price of an asset is about 77 cents. But you have a range of, sub penny for an asset to, hundreds of dollars for assets. And some assets are very functional, so some assets can get way more expensive than that because you might be renting some assets. Like people have created industries around breedables, which is you buy animals and then you have to be on a subscription plan to continuously feed your animal and tend to them. So there are all kinds of business models within the world because it's not just an asset as, oftentimes we think of an asset as like an image or a model or a sound, but they can become more complex. You can think of this functionality units that HUDs or game control assets and stuff that people use to enhance their worlds. So it's kind of somewhere between digital content and digital functional units like code. And it's extremely diverse, and but in Second Life it's all set by the users, and they own their own assets. We declared over a decade ago that you own your assets. They're not, since then the blockchain had come around where you can own the asset on sort of independent of an organization, rather than having to trust us. You sort of have an ownership that you don't have to trust an entity around it with the blockchain, which I think is a neat idea. And we'll see how Second Life might consider extending that. But we've already told the users that you own it. As long as they trust us with that relationship, then assets are tricky in the digital space because they tend to be unique to the specific platforms or games. So it's not that easy to trade assets amongst platforms or games. You kind of have to get to the sort of lowest common denominator type of assets to be, you know, exchangeable across games and platforms. You know, a sword in one game means absolutely nothing, or might have no functionality that makes sense in the context of another game or another platform. So there is really no universal language for more complex assets. You know, very basic assets like standard image or file formats are sort of cross exchangeable. But yeah, it's ultimately, it'll be a market. When it's just a game just selling skins to players, then that's much less interesting to me. I find it more interesting when it's a market-driven system.
I see Josie listening very intently. Actually, art is one of those things that can be easily transferred from one platform to the other. So you as a creator, you're really a business owner in these virtual spaces. Do you think about the interoperability, like how people move your art from one platform to the other? Is something that's on your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about value, a lot of things with art transition over from the traditional world that much of the value initially, at least from what I've seen, is derived in the reputation of the creator. And that goes for art and other brands as well. But it is really exciting once we get into the sphere of interoperability, what that means for the value. And also with blockchain, like how rare the item is, like Ebbe was just saying. All of my items, for example, are limited. So range from, you know, 1 of 1s to 21, an edition of 21, and then different numbers between there. And obviously that gives each item different values. But the exciting part is that within these, with NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which is how my art is minted and sold, different platforms can support these sorts of things. And we're starting to see, we see that already happening, for example, within virtual worlds like Crypto Voxels or Decentraland or Somnium Space. I'm super fortunate to have my art supported in all of those different worlds. And not only me putting up my own galleries, but then also the owners of my virtual art hanging it within their spaces and doing different things with it. But then we start to get to a really exciting space where your art is not only something that you hang in your space, but also something you can wear. So for my pieces in particular, I also give out with each purchase of art a virtual wearable. And of course, right now it is a bit cumbersome having to create assets that work for different worlds. And often they are all different NFTs. There's one that works at Crypto Voxels, one that works in Decentraland, and so on. So I think we are, you know, seeing those conversations happening and really starting to get, you know, teleports and hubs to each of these worlds within the worlds. And as you see that happening more and more, they are discussing interoperability and just how you can walk into each space and always have your identity. Even though it might look different, it might look pixelated in one world because that's the style, and then really robust in another world. You bring that along with you. And I think that for value is just everything and where we're headed to be able to do that.
So Josie, I think I looked at your art and I was interested in buying it directly from you, but I saw that all of the primary market for your work has basically been sold, and it's only available on secondary markets such as OpenSea. And I would actually like to hear you and Devin kind of talk about these secondary markets, how they work for artists. Is something that as an artist you support? Do you see people like buying your art and then selling it for profit, and seeing your work maybe more of an investment rather than just a piece that they own because they love and that it represents them? I would like to hear a bit more about that. Maybe Devin, you'd like to kind of come in, how the marketplace is also being used as a speculative platform for art and for other NFTs.
Sure. Yeah. And Josie probably has more insight on that than I do, with specifically related to art. I think just also to kind of respond in general to, you know, the question of what makes something valuable. You know, we also operate in the world of free markets, so it's certainly supply and demand is king. I would say, like, what we've kind of noticed is, or I think what drives value of these assets comes down to like kind of a list of ingredients. One, the most important probably is utility, right? Can you actually use this asset, whether even if it's just a piece of art, but can you display it somewhere, and is it useful, or does it have some role inside of a game? A second one is provenance, right? Where did this come from? Who was the creator of it? Is it someone that you admire, or someone that you want to support? Scarcity is another ingredient, right? How many of these are there going to be minted? Is there some sort of provable scarcity that there won't be a certain amount of supply of these things? Liquidity, so how possible is it to actually sell this on a secondary market? Are there easy to use options? So that's going to determine how much people are willing to pay for it. Longevity, so will this asset be around for the long term, or is it maybe part of a game that is might go away at some point in the future? So I think there's all these different ingredients that kind of drive the value of an asset, and there's some interesting areas where blockchain kind of contributes to making those ingredients more readily available and could potentially kind of expand the markets for these virtual goods. To answer your specific question around what we're seeing in the digital art market, my sense, and I think Josie would have more details here, is that there's sort of a wide variety of people who are purchasing these things. Some of them do view it as an investment, and on OpenSea as well as other art marketplaces, we've seen lots of purchases that will go up in value and turn out to be a good investment for people who purchase on the primary market and then are able to resell. But there are also other people who just view it as something that they want to collect, or a way to support the artist. And I think having kind of the mix of dynamics all come together in a marketplace is pretty cool and exciting. You can a lot of interesting things start to happen when you have that type of ecosystem. But I think the crypto art space it's certainly early days, and we're all just kind of figuring out what's going to happen.
Thank you. Yat, you might be in a different situation because I believe you use licensed art, right, to bring into virtual spaces. Does this create limitations for secondary markets, for example? How do you deal with these matters of value?
Well, I mean, I think just to sort of tap onto sort of what Devin was saying in sort of defining the value. Value is in many ways relative as well, right? So I think, why is a wedding ring that is, valuable amongst two generations? Certainly the silver in which it is made of is not that valuable, right? However, for the family that owns it, it's an invaluable product because there was sentimental value attached, right? Just the same way that Roger Federer's tennis racket is more valuable, even though you probably can't play with it anymore because it's all beaten up, but you can buy the brand new same racket for a much lower price elsewhere. So this is where value gets interesting when you talk about the digital space, because of course there you don't have decay in the same way, but the assets have provenance. And that's why we're excited about blockchain, because blockchain can attach history to it as well, as to who owned it, what happened to it. Is it a sword that was owned by this esports guy? Is it owned by a famous person? Or is it just my son that I want to pass it down to the next generation, right? So that's exciting because the scarcity aspect comes from the fact that there is a story to every asset, as it is in the real world, right? When they were made, they weren't valuable, but then they have a story. And the problem about games or most virtual assets and goods today is that they reside in the centralized database that effectively has no value because they get shut down, right? And of course, you have great organizations like Second Life that basically sort of promise. They become sort of that center and say, we will promise that you own this asset and we'll make sure that you'll never lose it, right? But those are still locked inside Second Life. In the real world, the value is defined by law and by government that says, you own it, right? But in the virtual world, you don't have that. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that games I view kind of as like sort of feudal kingdoms. So they're sort of in the dark ages, pre-Middle Ages almost, where they basically all the value attributes up to really just the small group of people that run it, which also means that the community themselves have very little interest in sort of making it better. They enjoy it maybe, or they can have the privilege of being there, but there's absolutely no friction really, innovative friction, because they don't really gain from it. And so what's exciting here, and more value I think comes increased, is that if actually people do have a stake in it and do have something to build, value will increase because you have competitive friction, right, for creation and making. In the same way that Second Life or Roblox or EVE, well, to some extent EVE Online have done, but still in centralized environments. And I think where I see sort of the value of those goods come up is that you have this free trade, right? Like what did free trade do in the real world? You know, capitalism and all that. We think free trade of virtual assets will explode. Enter the brands part. Brands, we think, one of the reasons we chose to work with brands is because we think it is an angle for non-blockchain people to come into the field, right? Because, you know, I don't know anything about blockchain, but I do know I like Formula One, or I do know I like MotoGP, right? And we have a history of collectibles. What I love about that is that you can make, like we have a Formula One game where you can play and race with it, but at the same time, even if I don't like to race with it, I can still own the car, right? And so you can then, and the other thing that's interesting is that even that car that maybe I don't like to play in this game, I can move it to another game. And like in the real world where I could buy a Ferrari and I could drive it in the Autobahn in Germany, or I could drive it somewhere in Hong Kong, maybe not very fast, right? But I could do whatever I want with it because I own it. And the brand owner is no longer in a position to say, wait, hold on, you don't own that, right? You can't do that because it, again, the container of value is the car itself, it's not the game. The game may shut down and we won't have an F1 game, but the person who bought the assets owns it and can use it freely elsewhere. And that brings in itself some really exciting opportunities. So the one thing I will point out though is that therefore the value of these assets need to come with the appropriate rights. So when you talk about brands, like we ensure that all of our IP licenses have perpetual rights. This is really important because with the blockchain side, you have one of the issues, which is that you can own the token forever, but do you own the image rights, right?
Right.
And because, you know, you could own the token, but you may not have an image attached to it because the license expired, right? So right now it's early in the space, so you don't have, you know, you don't have a sort of a Sotheby's or something that sort of gives a rating and says, hey, you know what, this digital asset has permanence and therefore has value. Or, you know, looking at Josie's art and saying, here's why that's valuable, right? We're very early. But as the space evolves, you'll get to that point. And so third-party valuers will come in because there's a market for that, right? You know, it's people are building it up. You know, what is it? I think the report that I think Devin was working on said like $300 million of NFTs currently roughly trading around. And by the time we hit $1 billion, there's going to be lots of other people that will have a business around valuing this stuff. So that's you know, it's a growing space.
Thank you. Tyler, I believe you had your hand up earlier. Sorry if I skipped you. Would you like to add something?
It's amazing how everyone kind of comes to a very similar place. I've heard comments of the things I wanted to comment on. You know, three major things I'd like to highlight. You know, the first one I talked about is persistence. We need to have these assets persist so that they have value. The second one was interoperability. And the idea that you might be able to transfer between platforms is a very compelling one in order to increase in value. And then the final one was provenance. It basically giving a good value. You know, I talked about this when we were initially doing FreeMyVunk, but like, how great would it be if a famous warrior named Eggdod used this sword in battle, like a very famous battle that we all participated in, and then later on you were able to buy that sword to participate on another platform where you were conducting like a whole series of quests, and people knew where that sword had come from and what it was. One of the things, like before we started the actual recording, I talked about how when we first started thinking about this during FreeMyVunk, we were a little bit over enthusiastic about how quickly it would come because we lacked tooling. And I imagine most people that are actually listening to this YouTube have a pretty good idea of where we're at right now. But there are certain things that are coming to market very quickly and very soon that will change the way these three attributes work together. I'm very excited about one in particular called Filecoin. Filecoin is this idea that you can host data for the entire internet. Like you have a decentralized database that you can draw from. And when you have virtual assets that will persist in their attributes, and I don't just mean like their name and their picture or their vision. I mean, we're talking about full 3D visualization. We're talking about a host, like a whole database of attributes that can be grown over time and mature to the point where you have things that have so much character, history, and richness. And then the other thing that these kind of global decentralized databases do for you is they enable you to start setting up standards of interoperability between platforms, where a platform can say, well, I'm going to adopt these characteristics that are stored in these virtual goods and allow those within my space. I mean, all of us want to live in Ready Player One in the Oasis. Like, we all want to live there, or the metaverse as it was defined by Neil Stephenson in Snow Crash. Like, we all want to live there. That's where we want to spend our virtual time.
I don't know about.
But we're not there yet. What's that?
I don't know about Snow Crash, but sure.
Are you kidding me? I want to have a samurai battle in the Black Sun. I want to be there. And I want to train myself in like some samurai techniques so that when I actually use this really famous sword that I bought years ago, that like it actually works. Anyway, like we've thought about this for a very, very long time. Virtual reality was a long time in coming. But I love this idea of the wearable that Josie talks about, because it really, what we're going to have very soon are the glasses that we wear with augmented reality, and the art or the virtual goods that we buy will also be represented through a lens in our physical reality. And we need this sort of like global database, data commons that persists and is interoperable and has provenance in order to really bring the vision of our sci-fi writers to life.
Thank you, Tyler. Just a little note. Your microphone is frying up a little bit. I think everyone can hear it too. So I'm not sure if it's a matter of volume or if you're using headphones, etc. Just
yeah, I might be just talking too loud because I get excited.
Well, I'm glad you're excited. I'm happy you're with us. So talking about opportunity, I think that's really what we're all waiting for. We're waiting for that like killer app that will really launch blockchain or NFTs really into the mainstream. I'd really like to hear briefly from each of you what you think that app or that application, that platform will be. I know Ebbe, for example, Second Life really launched the idea of us existing virtually. It was my first really interaction with my virtual self, talking to other people as an avatar. How has this changed in the last 17 years? What do you think is going to push this even further into the mainstream? Maybe we can start with you.
Well, obviously this transition of humanity sort of transitioning from 100% physical space existence to now a mix of physical and virtual. And that trend is obviously just up and to the right, where it's more of our time is spent virtually, like we're doing right now, versus in physical space, whether it's just for conversation or for some kind of existence or business. So, and we can obviously see the trend of younger generations are growing up. Some of them spending more time in the virtual space than in physical space, and some think that's unhealthy. But for some, it's in Second Life, it's less about some sort of game dynamic that has you hooked. It's actually having a second life. And there's, for a lot of people in Second Life, it's not a second life, it's a first life.
Right.
Because the physical space is not ideal for everybody. So for a lot of people, the virtual space is actually a better space for people to function, whether it's because of physical constraints, financial constraints, mental constraints. You have all kinds of reasons why the virtual space is a better place for a lot of people. And as technologies and platforms and tools and systems mature, it's becoming more valuable to more and more of us And so more of us are transitioning into the virtual space because it enables us to have a better social life or a better economic life, or, you know, all kinds of reasons. And so, you know, now you see people even, you know, doing workouts and health in VR. And so it's you know, expanding sort of the utility of the virtual space continues to expand. So we'll, you know, many decades from now, you know, it's going to be interesting where some people basically grow up and sort of spend most of their time in virtual space because that's where their friends are, where their business is, where they make their money. You know, there's very few things you can't do in virtual space. I've only thought of a few. You can't really procreate, you know, create kids in virtual space. You can have virtual kids, but like if you want to have a physical, you know, extension of your gene pool, then you can't do that virtually, and you can't eat. But other than that, you can pretty much do everything else, right? So if the virtual world can give you the funds, you can then do a virtual order, and then the food comes, and you can just keep remaining in the virtual space. So, and the use cases are, like I said, so extremely broad. It's not, I mean, gaming obviously is kind of where you know, most of the time is spent, but more and more it's also becoming sort of just life itself, all the things that people want to do, and you know, how they want to express themselves, how they want to connect with people, how they want to find a community to belong to, how it's, and Second Life is kind of like the petri dish of all of these things that, you know, we can all learn from, you know. And will there be a sort of a global decentralized ecosystem ultimately that enables us to do this without the dependency on any one organization? That'll be interesting to see. Interoperability is a tricky one. I mean, the internet doesn't even have interoperability for a lot of things. Like it's you know, except for some sort of common standard formats. Fine, I can send you a JPEG and it's fairly universally understood. But okay, when you get to more advanced stuff, you know, different games and platforms, you know, you can't just, you know, take a bunch of stuff from Unity and throw it in Unreal or in Second Life or many other sort of platforms and just have it magically, you know, work as you would expect. And you know, this create once and run everywhere attempts have been made in sort of in internet space for a long time, whether it's Java or, you know, Microsoft tried with, you know, DirectX or whatever, but they've never really become universal. So it's always this sort of friction to sort of have everybody agree to sort of a common standard for everything. Because a lot of games and platforms and virtual worlds, you know, are trying to solve some really unique problems, and they're hard problems to solve. And if you try to do it with common standards, you put a huge amount of friction on your ability to sort of innovate and do unique implementations of things. So, but I love the idea of the blockchain. I love the idea of sort of being able to have sort of a true ownership, independent of anybody. It's just unclear still for what types of assets that will truly be meaningful, because they are truly, you know, have utility over the long run in various contexts. And even platforms themselves sort of evolve and don't necessarily, are not necessarily even backwards compatible with assets that were created on its platform in, you know, in the past. You know, you know, even, you know, Unity comes out with a new release. The game developers go, oh no, like I want to take these new features, but all my stuff is going to break, you know? And that's why Second Life chose to build its own platform, because we then have full control over backwards compatibility forever, right? And so you can find assets in Second Life that created 15 years ago, and they're still there, they're still functioning, they're still working. And that's a huge technical challenge in of itself, of sort of ensuring that all these assets that people create and find value in continues to have value over time. That's a really hairy problem, and few platforms actually care about that. Unity and Unreal engines, they don't care. You can take an upgrade of the engine, and you have to, because there's security leaks or new features or whatever. You can't assume that everything you've created in the past will just magically work. So it's a complex problem.
Thank you. But I would just like to note that you have a lot of fans online saying that you are amazing.
I'm not listening to, but yeah,
so,
we obviously have some very, very dedicated and successful people within the Second Life ecosystem. So they tend to be quite appreciative. Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to Yat. Actually, you were talking about eternal ownership, right? So we were talking how things break with time, things become less compatible. How do you actually account for that? If I buy an asset that I really wanted as an heirloom for my family, something I want to invest, something I want to give forward, how can you actually promise this type of eternal ownership?
Well, I mean, I think part of this is the fact that it's on the blockchain. That in itself gives the immutability. Now, whether that is the sort of right format is a different question, but at least you know the asset is minted and is permanent. I think the important distinction here, though, unlike the real world, because it is a virtual world and you can make anything happen really, is that the way interoperability may exist in one virtual world versus another doesn't have to be one-to-one, right? I mean, we imagine that if I drive a car, then I must be able to drive the car as well somewhere else because it has a wheel. But in a virtual world, I could fly it, right? It could turn into a robot. It could be spare parts for something else. I mean, so there's a lot of things you could do. And the way that we imagine that this could be in the future is, and where the whole concept is flipped upside down, is that, you know, game developers will make games that take advantage of virtual assets because these virtual assets have large audiences, right? So yeah, so let's take, I mean, Fortnite as an example. I mean, you know, Fortnite's not going to do that because it's going to break their business model, and that's fine. It's more opportunity for people like us. However, oh, sorry, I got to turn this one off. However, the difference here is that sorry, I lost my train of thought. So I was talking about sorry, the value of these
value of assets over time.
Yeah. Value of assets over time. Sorry, because just had this thing, I had to turn it off. So no, so going back to my train of thought here, because it's the manifestation is different. The way that we think is that if Fortnite was to actually produce these sort of assets on the blockchain, for instance, you know, 70 million users would suddenly become available as customers to other virtual worlds out there. They're simply making it accessible, right? And so that's something that we think is interesting, because then, you know, in the current model, of course, no game company would like to do that because that means they'll lose their customers. However, in the blockchain world, you can tax that. I know who's using it. I have a way of tracking it, right? So I could do a transaction or whichever. And I think the big difference here with something like using blockchain is that currently all virtual worlds, including API economy ones, are permission to use, right? Versus when you mint objects as tokens, it's ready to use. So whether you choose to use it in one way or another, that's entirely up to you, but at least you can use it any which way you want, right? Whereas in other platforms, the ones we have today on the internet, you need to ask and seek for permission first, which adds an additional friction, right? I mean, in my case, I mean, if I was able to use my Ultima Online assets, you know, in another game, that'd be kind of awesome. If, you know, how many other indie game developers would come up and make a new game that could take advantage of Ultima Online, sort of, you know, if they were able to regurgitate. It might not be big enough for a big game studio, but might be big enough for a small 5 or 10 person studio. I think this sort of whole era of interoperability is really important. The paradigm I tend to compare it against is sports. Right now, you know, esports is the paradigm of, you know, if you're Michael Jordan, you make a lot of money, but everyone else basically doesn't make any money at all, right? But if you, the virtual world right now doesn't allow opportunities to come from the outside because of the walled gardens. If I was, you know, you can't have a Nike, because if I was Nike, I have to play in a Nike stadium with Nike assets and other people who have Nike assets. But in the real world, I can use Nike to walk on the street, to wear it for a show, to go for a football match. I can do whatever I want. And the exciting thing here is that actually, if all worlds allowed for this interoperability, then it allows outside people to come in and make assets intended, or maybe not even intended, for those virtual worlds to fit in, right? That means you can have a Nike or Puma or Adidas in games, where maybe that's all they do. They just do virtual web clothes, right? Or what Josie does, virtual art, or sort of virtual sort of you know, skins of some sort. And other game companies simply adopt that because they want that audience. And there's a whole new business that can be created that you don't have to, you know, that are not dependent on getting permission from the large companies. But the large companies will grow because you have these large communities. The last point I'll just add to this is gaming suffers from one main thing, which is conversion. It's roughly on average 1.5%. And that in itself drives roughly $70 billion of an industry, right? And most of what the game industry has been able to achieve is through simple new users. The smartphone basically just, you know, quadrupled the size of the gaming market. And that's what the gaming market has enjoyed. Simple growth of users, right? It's like opening up new markets. But now it's hit a saturation point where it's still growing, but not as fast because, you know, more kids are born. So yes, you have more people playing games, right? But you don't have the same rate of growth as you have before. And the conversion rates have stayed the same. And the reason we think conversion rates stay the same is because you still don't own anything, right? There's no value there. But if you then really bring in this true value, we think this is going to explode in terms of ownership because people actually have a reason to own them. And in our industry, a 1% conversion is basically a $30–40 billion expanse of the market. Right? So that's why we think this is so exciting.
Thank you very much, Yat. I'm mindful of time. We might extend a bit further if you do have time. I'm aware that Ebbe must leave in about 5 minutes. So I want to give you a couple minutes to give any parting words, maybe about the future of Second Life or virtual assets, just to before you head out.
Yeah. I think there's, obviously we continue to add capabilities so that you can create more and more creative assets over time and, you know, improving the tools to make it easier for people to create these assets. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of creators and, you know, hundreds of thousands of you know, buyers and consumers of these assets. But, you know, I think interesting problems to tackle over time. One is like supply chain is an interesting problem. We tackled in Sansar, a virtual reality platform that we sold recently, where, you know, you can start to have value beyond the first sale of something. So think of a car. You always have unique manufacturers of independent pieces. Someone's awesome at creating wheels. Someone's great at creating, you know, other parts. And you want to be able to have people be able to construct new assets using other assets. And then when those assets get sold forward, how do the person that created a piece of that construct get a piece of the action, and how do you distribute money that way? So that's some, you know, a very common way in the physical world. And I think in the virtual world, that will be required as well, because you end up having specialists. You don't have creators that can create everything. I mean, in Second Life, if you want good trees or bushes for your garden, you go to the tree guy. You know, those are, you know, you can't make it yourself necessarily, and you can't just get it from anybody. So you have all these specialists. There are people that specialize in sort of hands and hair and, you know, unique, you know, boats, whatever. And so enabling more sort of smaller assets to combine into larger assets and sort of distribute the value of that as it moves forward is an interesting problem to solve for. And we did that in Sansar by creating the supply chain solution. But so that's something we might consider in the future for Second Life. Also consider, we've looked a lot at the blockchain. At what point would it make sense for us to not just declare ownership within our database, but sort of in the blockchain, so that it's clear to the user that it's not just our trust you have to lean on, but you can now say I own this, you know, with independently of anybody. That's something we might consider in the future. Interchange of obviously of various currencies. How do people trade across platforms? How do I, you know, take my Linden dollars and how can I, you know, use my earnings there on some other platform? So how do you have interchangeable currencies easily? And then you get into a lot of regulatory stuff. So there's a lot of stuff still to crack. And, you know, we made our viewer open source, so you have a lot of different unique viewers to use Second Life, but we didn't make the server open source. Is that a step we take in the future to sort of open source more of our platform? There's there's a endless amount of work to do to continue to sort of make the ability for people to create and own and use digital assets more meaningful over time, because it's going to happen. It is happening, and our dependency on the virtual world for a meaningful existence for all of us is going to become more and more critical. Right now, there's a lot of people for whom it doesn't even exist and has no value yet. But over time, I think it will become a critical component of what people need to know and learn and use to be, functional and create value over time. So all these kids spending a lot of time in virtual worlds playing, I think are actually getting a great education for what the future holds. So
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily, stop kids from doing what they're doing, even though some of us might think it's mad that they're just shooting people all day. But they're also learning a little bit of what living in the future will look like. And so it's just a super exciting thing. I mean, working on Second Life is I've done a lot of cool things in my life and had opportunity to work on a tremendously popular products, whether it's Microsoft Office or Yahoo's all media properties on Yahoo, whatever. But this is by far the most interesting job, because I can come to work and deal with economies and good virtual goods creation and avatar, and so it's so diverse. You just the spectrum of issues you have to tackle to create a successful virtual world platform and then an associated economy is endless possibilities and opportunities. So it's we're all having a lot of fun, I'm sure. So it's a great time.
Thank you so
With
much
that,
for
I
your
have
time.
to say bye and thank you to all Second Life users, and any of you who are interested in enabling an economy where users can extract real value with real, today currencies they can use to buy a hamburger and feed themselves. Ring us up and talk to us about how we can help you with Tilia to enable that exchange between the virtual and physical worlds of value. So thank you for having me, and I hope to connect with you guys all more in the future, but sorry, I have to jump off now. So continue the conversation and enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you. Actually, maybe the purest asset or good for me is art. So I wanted to go back to Josie here and really get your perspective. If we jump 10 years into the future, what does art, virtual art look like in 2030?
Sure. I mean, that's a very long time, so I don't know if I have the exact answer there. But I think what's exciting and what we're already starting to see the very beginning of, and I would love to see more and more of, not just within art, but also in other assets, is programmability, updates, the fact that art, for example, if you hold, which blockchain gives you this capability, but if you have a wallet that holds a certain asset, you get special access to, the basement of my gallery within a virtual world. And it starts to build art not only as something to just view, but different assets, more than just art, give you this amazing community that is built. And if you can give your community a special access or some sort of feeling that they're a part of something bigger and a part of something exclusive, that is really, really special. And I'm sure we'll start to see more of that, especially with larger brands coming into the space. And also the other really exciting things that I hope we see more of, and we're starting to see more of, especially within art, is that it doesn't have to be static. I have art that is, updates based on the Ethereum price, updates based on, the time of day, updates based on your location and in your world. And imagine if your Ferrari in the virtual world can change colors based on your actual location, whether you set that to a real location or that you're actually in, or to a different part of the world. I think that's where we start to get into really, really exciting times, just where things are not just static, and it gives you that re-excitement for the piece. But then also over time, especially with art, it gives you more value as well, depending on what kind of transition it is in that moment.
Thank you. I see Yat nodding, so I'm just gonna go straight to you. I'd like to know where you see your business or your industry in 10 years. What does Animoca brand look like in 2030?
Okay. Well, as a public company, we're not supposed to be giving forward-looking statements.
I'm taking notes.
We could be in trouble. but broadly speaking, from an industry perspective, I would say, and for us as a business, look, I really hope that, I think of this as a $1 trillion industry, multi-trillion-dollar industry in the making. The comparison I make to this is very similar to smartphone 2010, roughly, right? And for those of you who may remember, when there was no app store, it was a $0 industry. Today, it's a $2.5 trillion industry that is pretty much powering everything out there. So in the space of 10 years, could this be an even bigger industry? I think so. But I think part of this, the bigger paradigm here is around sort of ownership. And again, I gave this example earlier about how old games are feudal kingdoms and so on, right? Well, actually, that's the internet today, unfortunately. It wasn't the vision of the internet, but that's what's happened, right? Facebook is a feudal kingdom too, right? To an extent, so is Google, right? All of the data, we're all doing user-generated content. Facebook is a huge user-generated content platform, but they're enriched by the data we give to them for essentially the drug of social, right? If you will. But the value doesn't go back, right? And so ultimately, that means a limit will be hit, we think, much like, sort of 1,000 years ago, because there is only a small group of people that have an incentive to grow in that space. And if we can make it participatory, which is why we think virtual assets is so great, because it's that meta where you can start to participate without being a shareholder, but still being an asset holder, right? You're a citizen of a city or a country because you own maybe a property or you own something, but that doesn't make you a shareholder of the city. I think it's the same for virtual worlds as well. And I think, so our big hope is that there's going to be interoperability in a big way, because, and that there's going to be incredible job opportunities because people like Josie are going to come make incredible pieces of art who don't need to know how to code, right? Who don't need to know how to sort of, program or have a specific unique skill set, but they just need to be creative, and other people can then basically use that. And she has a way to benefit from that, like whether it's a small business or a large business, right? And I think that friction is important because right now the digital world is exclusive. We don't have more other ways of participating, and I think virtual assets and goods is a way where you can start to participate more than just being the ones who code it, but also being able to participate through trade, through ownership, through basically what we see in the real world. And we hope to be, as Animoca brands, one of the pioneers in the space, hopefully, particularly bringing branded goods into that. And I'm hoping that we can help guide towards interoperability, because the other reality is that a lot of other players in the space, particularly the game companies, don't like interoperability because it's essentially tearing down their business models. And so we want to hopefully be supporting that. And that's the opportunity, right? I think.
Thank you very much. Devin, I think OpenSea has made a clear bet on how they see the world in 2030, but I'd like to hear a bit more from you about your vision. How big will the markets be? How will they operate? What are the main assets that will be in them? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future of your industry.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we have like a super clear picture of exactly where it will be in 2030, but a lot of what Yat was saying definitely resonates with me. I think in a lot of ways, and not just in the blockchain space, but also if you look at kind of what's happening with virtual reality right now as well, these virtual worlds are just becoming more and more real and more economically valuable, and more of a place where real interactions, real social, I mean, it's already happening. I think it's just going to continue to accelerate, is this idea that more and more of our lives will be spent inside of virtual environments, and more of our economic lives will be spent there as well. So I think the ingredients for that, I think how that will play out exactly is really hard to predict. I think there's a strong case to be made that centralized worlds are actually also in their early stages and will sort of grow and become larger and larger economies, and then maybe there'll be a shift from below from decentralized technologies, and most of that activity over the next 5 years will be with smaller players, or maybe there will be some event where a bigger company decides to adopt more of a decentralized technology and open up their platform. I think there's a lot of different ways it could play out, but in general I would say that I think the shift is pretty clear, right? The shift is that these worlds are becoming more and more valuable over time, and the economies are going to grow dramatically. If you think about kind of Second Life, while it is this relatively large economy, it's in the sort of grand scheme of things, it's quite small, and there's only a certain number of people who want to kind of engage in the type of content that Second Life provides, who want to go sort of all out and have a virtual avatar and a virtual life in sort of this specific environment. If that were opened up and your virtual goods could sort of be used across all sorts of different environments, think about how big that economy might look. It would look a lot more like the real world economy. So I think, it's really hard to say exactly how it all play out, but I'm definitely super excited.
Thank you. I see, Josie, you raised your hand. Tyler, I'll get right back to you, but Josie, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add how important the secondary market is, just as you guys were talking. The really special thing, especially with assets that are minted on the blockchain, is that with some of my pieces, for example, and also with a lot of other game assets, I can actually make more on the secondary market with an asset than I did on the primary. So if I have a piece that I sold for $200 and it's selling through the secondary, and often my collectors have strong hands, so they're not going to sell unless it's a 10x return minimum.
Right.
But I also get to keep a portion of that piece, which OpenSea allows, and you can set your own percentage, and other platforms allow as well. So I think the really exciting thing is when these games start to realize if they do make their own economies, they still can get that revenue through the secondary market. And like I said, it is true. There are pieces, a lot of my pieces actually, that I make more in my small royalty than I did on the initial sale of it. And that's amazing. And I totally welcome people who are coming into the space purely to invest, or if it's just purely because they enjoy the piece, because both of those people get to benefit from it. So I think that'll be really exciting once we see like larger games sort of opening their eyes to that and realizing, because they can really benefit from it as well.
That's actually a really interesting paradigm that many real world artists have complained about before. So they'll sell pieces for a price and then they go up on auction with Christie's for 100 times and they really don't see any of those returns. So thank you for pointing that out. I think smart contracts have really interesting applications that are really impossible to enforce in the real world, quote unquote, but are become really opportunities in virtual spaces. I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. So I'm really excited to hear Tyler's point of view on this, given that you predicted in some way the rise of these virtual goods taking up so much space. So how do you see the sphere in 10 years?
I've got a few thoughts. I'm gonna try to move through them efficiently, but I wanted to flip back to the last question, because I think when I watch streams on YouTube, I really want to find out new nuggets that I didn't know about, that people that are immersed in the space actually see evolving. And because I'm not affiliated with anyone, I can just drop names like crazy, and like I have no like repercussions. So killer apps. People should totally check out things like Formula One. Super cool. Love that stuff. They should check out Gods Unchained And the thing that I'm most excited about actually is a recent launch called Engine Craft, which is a plugin for Minecraft that was created by the largest sort of modding community around a platform called Engine. Engine has about 20 million users of Minecraft, and they just dropped their plugin, which is like a seamless thing for people who run servers to implement virtual blockchain-based assets in their Minecraft worlds. And I think this is going to go absolutely nuts. The experiments that are going to happen in Minecraft are going to look like they're just going to expand exponentially, because that's a community more than like the mainstream user for blockchain is totally the gamer, but even better than that, like the core hardcore user is the modder. Like the person who mods in games, they're going to get a hold of this and they're going to go nuts, creating these new assets for their server communities, and creating all sorts of interesting economic experiments about why something has value. Josie talks about like access to like the art basement. You know, that's going to happen in these Minecraft communities, and it's going to be an incredible thing to watch. So those are some of like the killer apps that I think I see going forward at present. Now, if we start projecting into the future, I have an idea, and give me a second to kind of unroll it a little bit, because people may not be familiar with all the bits coming together. But games and decentralized finance are the ultimate combination. We have some new and very interesting tools within decentralized finance that will change the way game companies operate. So, the most recent model of free to play is kind of it was like the explosion in iOS, right? Just get users, and then you can monetize based on a very small percentage of your users. What I think we're going to see going forward are platforms that try to persist. I mean, look at Second Life. Look how long it's tried to persist. Sorry, am I having a...
Yes, your sound is crackling. So if you could just maybe...
Is it better when I lower my voice?
Headphones? Yes, please.
Yeah. Sorry, I just talk really loud. I'll use another headset next time. So, we look at how long Second Life has persisted, but any platform that is a long persisting platform, it builds technical debt, right? It depreciates because its platform was built on technology that is old and not as performant. And so you get this technical debt that builds over time. And that's why we see these life cycles of games where you have the initial adoption, right? You have to spend a lot of money to develop that platform. And that money is hard to get. It requires investors to take a big chance. They want to see a large adoption. They want to see the capitalization reach the point where it was worth it. And then there's like a natural decrease because of that technical debt builds up, and new offerings come to the table that are much better, much more immersive, better graphics, better concepts, more exciting in terms of like what the next generation wants to see. And so we see that decline. But projects like Second Life have, and there's others like Ultima Online, Entropia Universe, things where value really was built, they seem to have a longer tail. And DeFi is where we can come in and change the model. Let me explain this. There's two projects that people should check out. One is called Pool Together. Another one is called RDAI. Essentially what this does is by holding a token and participating in these platforms, you can participate in what's called risk-free. It's not totally risk-free because there is a code risk, but risk-free loans, and you get an interest rate. So right now you can go on various Ethereum platforms, things like Compound, Aave, there's lots of them out there. But you can put money and receive an interest rate that is virtually risk-free. What I see going forward is that communities within games, instead of maybe there's an initial purchase of the game, but what they're going to have is dedicated people to the game that say, okay, I'm willing to just couch $100. I'm not going to lose the $100. I'll get the $100 back anytime I want to pull out. But if I just let $100 sit inside this game, they will build interest through these decentralized finance platforms. And you have a community that just kind of lets their money sit inside the community. Then that gives the revenue for that game to continue to build and to basically stay up to date, so they don't build up this technical debt. Mm-hmm. And that's a way that a community, without losing any money, let's say I just have my gaming budget is $100. I'm going to spend $100 this year, which is not true because I spend a ridiculous amount of money in video games. I have many starships in Star Citizen, so I spend a lot of money. But if I was to say, like, my gaming budget is $100 this year, I'm going to stick $100 in the platforms that I play. And then the interest gained on decentralized finance platforms pays the development companies to continue to build and augment the game. Mm-hmm. Now, that also creates this incentive for interoperability, because the games that I participate in all be interoperable, because when I buy the assets, now I'm accruing value across all my virtual identity, and I want those all to be interoperable. So now, as a customer, I'm pushing the game companies that if you want my interest-bearing dollars, then you have to align with my interests. And I could see games persisting in this model 50, 100 years, because I'm willing to take my $100 and sit it in a pot that just keeps paying out interest to these game development platforms over decades. Okay. And I can always, when I'm tired of the game or I want to do something else, I can pull that money back out. It's my money. I only used it as a means to gain interest for these platforms. This is a way where an indie company who has a very small but loyal community could immediately start to build funds without costing their community anything. Just like, I'm excited about this game to come to light. Yeah, I'd be willing to couch $500 that I can take back at any time so this game can get built. It's a lot like the Tesla model, to be honest. Like, right. Do I have a Cybertruck pre-order? Heck yes, I do, because it cost me $100 for the opportunity in the future to buy a Cybertruck. If someone came to me and says, here's a game, and I got excited, here's my $100. I'll let it sit there because I one day want to play your game. And if it doesn't come to light, I get my $100 back. I see. Or if I play it for 10 years, then I get my $100 back. I'm done with it. So this is an idea of how the future could grow. I know that was kind of long, but it's a concept that I know not many people are familiar with because it's very new. But decentralized finance and gaming are going to interoperate, and they're going to create all new business models.
It is fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm a bit mindful of time. We're way over time, but I do want to give each of you maybe a minute for concluding thoughts, or to add something you haven't had time or chance to share. Maybe Devin, you'd like to start with this?
Sure. Let's see. I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. I guess maybe an interesting thing for me to share is just, I think a lot of the blockchain gaming space has flown a little bit under the radar, primarily because right now, a lot of these applications are pretty tricky to use. Like, they require typically acquiring crypto, getting a wallet, sort of understanding a lot of technical stuff. So I would just encourage, but that being said, I think, once you overcome those barriers to entry to trying out the space, all of those barriers, which I think will go down over time, you're really like kind of in this interesting world of blockchain gaming and digital art and virtual land and all of these things. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to kind of, go out and try a lot of these projects. So go try out Formula One, go to OpenSea and look through the digital art selection. Our rankings page kind of shows the top projects by volume. There's virtual worlds like Decentraland and the Sandbox, and so there's this whole world out there that a lot of people just don't know about because it's kind of hard to access, and the experiences are a little bit rough around the edges just because things are so early. But it's all actually happening right now, which is really exciting, and things are being built. Wallets are improving. Underlying blockchains are kind of shifting underneath us. So it's a really exciting time to get involved from all different angles as a, as someone who's entrepreneurial, who wants to build a company in the space. I think it's a really exciting time. As someone who's entrepreneurial and just wants to sort of, build a project or, become a thought leader and just get really deep in the space. I think it's a really interesting time. As a player, a gamer who wants to treat these assets as not only things they want to play around with and interact with, but also as investments. I think it's an extremely exciting time. As an art collector, I think, it's also extremely exciting. So it's a world of opportunity that, if you talk to people kind of in the mainstream tech ecosystem, it's really like completely flying under the radar. So if you're viewing this, that's great. And I think I would encourage you to kind of go deeper, because if you just sort of stay at the surface level, you might not discover all the interesting things that are out there.
Thank you, Devin. Maybe Yat, you'd like to have some concluding thoughts?
Thank you. So first of all, it's a great honor being here. Primarily also because it's very encouraging to see that there is a small but growing base of people who really believe in a vision. It reminds me very much of when the internet, say 30 or more years ago. And I hate saying that because it just makes me feel old. But I remember because when we set up one of the first ISPs, actually the first ISP in Hong Kong in the early 90s, we had the same conversations, right? Like setting up a wallet is hard. What, did you try dial-up with modems? Right, that was hard too, right? Oh, yeah. TCP/IP and DNS and like all that rubbish, right? It was just hard. And we had to pitch people and explain to them why that was useful. And then they went onto a website that was powered on Mosaic, and they were like, what is that? No, that doesn't look so cool, right? So that's kind of a little bit where blockchain is to an extent. However, the people who built that space at the time had great visions, and they wanted something better for the world, right? And I know that sounds kind of utopian, but that is what it is, right? And that's how open source really grew and so forth. But somewhere in between, it started changing because of the nature of the technology that was available. And now it went from what was meant to be this great decentralized open information thing to this centralized controlled thing and back into sort of quasi-monopolies. And what I love about blockchain, about this opportunity, is it's a little bit like history repeating itself, but an opportunity to redo it in a way, with a community that can build up with some advantages of knowing from history, but also technologically, the adoption rate we think is much faster. I actually think that the gaming space obviously is a big space on blockchain adoption. I think gamers really need it because adding the paradigm of value to gamers will cause that next explosion. Because and I think the aspect of value is important. If I play a game, I'm not going to move onto a wallet just because I might make money. But if I'm suddenly playing a game and I'm suddenly sitting on $100 of value or something, I'll go through whatever effort I need, right, to be able to convert on that, right? It's like, if I give you a check, then I'll open a bank account. I don't care if it takes me 2 weeks. It's the same thing, right? So the value part, I think, is the most important part to get that drive of adoption. And we have a chance to sort of make right what kind of went wrong maybe 15 years ago. So I'm super choked about the opportunity.
And yet things are going very well for you. I heard one of the crypto assets has sold for over $100,000 in wrapped Ether recently.
So I mean, I think we made an initial splash ourselves when we sold the first Formula One car for 113,000 US a year ago, which was really surprising to us as well. And since then, the cars have done well, and it's an interesting lesson for us in terms of how value is, because it's affected the project in a reverse way. Because suddenly the cars were so valuable, we were not in a position, we had to rethink the model, because we couldn't hurt the people who had bought these assets. So it's an interesting psychology that game companies don't have to think about. But the other project that's doing really, really well, we're super excited, is the Sandbox, which is basically kind of like a Minecraft on the blockchain. And the team has sold sort of land, and just last week, every week they're selling some land. It sells out within 5 minutes. And yes, it's a hardcore early adopter audience, right? That's really sort of passionate about it. But that was how the community was, passionate and engaged and looking to build a better future.
We might have another live chat maybe on virtual worlds. We also have questions about the gray markets, people who make a living, boosters or provide in-game services. We will probably leave these for another conversation just because of time. I'm happy to have Ebbe come back with us. That's a really nice surprise. We're delighted to have you back. We're actually wrapping up. I'm not sure if you've been following the conversation, but if you'd like to have another minute of concluding thoughts, you're welcome.
No, I just the other meeting finished quickly, and I was surprised you guys were still cranking along. So I've missed whatever you guys were talking about since I left. But again, I just want to reiterate that I think what all of the people do on the panel here are doing is super exciting, and I look forward to ability to interact with you guys more in the future and see what we can do together to move all of these things we're talking about forward. It's some of the things we're talking about will take decades to mature. Some of the things we're talking about might take months or years, but we're definitely talking a very long path here. I mean, the blockchain has been around for a while now, and it's going to take a long time for it to sort of find massive utility, but it will happen. There's no doubt in my mind. And so it's just like the most exciting time ever that we have all of these possibilities, tools, and technology available to make people's lives better, and enabling people to not just have fun but to actually earn income is like feels so good, knowing that people are not just entertaining themselves, but are like really benefiting and having much improved lives, whether it's economically or psychologically or socially or whatever it is. So yeah, my these days I'm spending a lot of time on various conferences inside of Second Life, and actually I gotta go get some food here because I think in about 30 minutes I have to be in Second Life at a conference and a panel. All sitting right. With my avatar, but that will also be broadcast out on YouTube. And so we have more and more of these events taking place, lots of panels. Dragster, a very prominent sort of creator and speaker and promoter of sort of virtual lives. He's done some incredible documentaries around people's lives in Second Life. He has a weekly book club in Second Life, and it's always packed house. And thousands of people following, and now all the bookstores are closed or have been around the world, and so the authors haven't had a chance to interact with their audience and connect. And we're now they can do it virtually and reach a much larger audience than they can at various local book clubs. So I think so part of this pandemic, I think, is accelerating sort of the virtual experience, and a lot of people are for the first time realizing the value of sort of the virtual space. So, the pandemic sucks, but it's also for us in the industry we're in, it's kind of a bit of a boost to have people realize that a lot of the things we took for granted can only be done in physical space, can be done equally well, or in many cases, much, much better in virtual space. And so I think we're right on the edge of it's, accelerating and faster. So, super exciting times.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you. I'm going to leave Josie till the end, but Tyler, do you have a minute for concluding thoughts? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I echo the statements that have been made thus far. What I would also add is that many people ask, like, why are we still at the very beginning? Why does it feel like this needs to be farther along? The blockchain is it's a new innovation, but in a lot of ways, we took a step back in terms of the power of computing in order to make it decentralized. Mm-hmm. And what people don't understand is that right now, Now, we are finally getting layer 2 solutions and layer 1. So in Ethereum, we are watching incredible releases right now about layer 2 scalability. And we're on the path to get to layer 1 scalability. And what that means is that within the next 3 years, we're going to be talking about hundreds, if not millions, of transactions a second capability on these decentralized ledgers, which means, because up until now, we've done everything we've done so far on like 7 to 12 transactions a second, thereabouts, right? Pretty slow. And what we're about to achieve in the very near future is hundreds of thousands to millions of transactions a second, and we're starting to see the release of these global global decentralized databases, right? Those two things combined will mean that we can actually create full games decentralized on the blockchain. And CryptoKitties was like this tiny, tiny little vision about what could happen, and it caused a Cambrian explosion.
Right.
When we start to see the scalability really take hold, these layer 2 ZK roll-ups, optimistic roll-ups, for anyone who's in the space, these terms that you don't quite understand, but they're really in-depth cryptography, these types of releases are going to create new experiences for virtual goods, lives, everything else, identities that we don't even understand yet. It's about to begin right now. So as Devin said, if you are passionate, throw yourself into this space. You will not regret it. This is going to grow exponentially.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Let's not forget that behind all of this technology, it wouldn't really be useful without the artists, the modders, the architects, and the designers who are really building the worlds that we interact with and the assets that we want to own. So I wanted to hear from Josie to end this live chat. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to echo a lot of what Devin said, especially as a creator. It's not too early to join in and just get your feet wet going on OpenSea and exploring. There are also so many other things going on, talks like this. There are meetups within the virtual worlds that literally the only thing you have to do to get there is put in a URL, and you can even attend on your phone. So there are so many things going on that you can be involved with. And I really encourage people to, get on Discord and become a part of the communities. The community is still small and really excited about new users coming on. So there are so many people willing to help and kind of lend a hand there. And a big kind of, I'm just a fan and a user. I'm not technically affiliated with them, but a big way that I can offer to people that are new into the space or just haven't explored it yet is in, is in CryptoVoxels. And it's a virtual land space, virtual world where the community actually creates all of the wearables and the assets there. And developers can come in and script up different mini games, which they're still working on. But that is definitely a community that I'd say anyone can be a part of. There are 12-year-olds who made a hamburger shop with his dad and literally sell virtual burgers. Like, the opportunities and options are endless. And I will also offer myself, and I know so many other people in CryptoVoxels have land that is undeveloped because there's just lack of time or, whatever it may be. The really exciting thing is the only thing we need to get the hump over is you getting a MetaMask, a wallet, and I can actually give contributor access to anyone to build on open land. And I know there are hundreds of parcels that literally are open up to the community to build whatever they want. So reach out to me, myself, to the CryptoVoxels Discord, to whoever. And even if you don't really want to build, but you just want to explore, go to the URL, cryptovoxels.com, and go explore. It's literally that simple. There's weekly meetups. There's, personalized private tours of different galleries. There's, subways that bring you to different parts. There's teleports to other worlds. So there's so much going on there. really, like everyone just said, you know, be a part of it, consume it, create if you can. A lot of these are pretty easy to create in, and that's sort of where I'll leave it. But also, yeah, just be a part of it. There's so much content going on. And if you have questions, don't be afraid to reach out to everyone else.
Thank you so much for everyone. We're really excited to see what the future holds, and we're hoping to have more of these live chats soon. So please do follow us on L'Atelier's Twitter, because that's where the conversation will continue. So until next time, see you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.